Welcome to Creators Cafe. I'm your host, Jessica Payne. I'm a performer, performance coach, and multi-hyphenate creator. I'm going to be bringing you conversations with some of my favorite creators where we talk about the sublime and the specifics of the creative journey. So grab a drink, get cozy. Let's go. My guest, Marshall Knight, is a Hollywood TV writer. Most recently, you've seen his work as the executive story editor on Suits LA. This is after his success on the original hit show, Suits, which was my pandemic comfort show, and I have watched every single episode of. Marshall first got into the studio system with an internship at Paramount in the motion picture creative division. He then went on to get in a writer's room as a PA on Lone Star, which led to a position on Homeland, where he got to be in a room of writing greats and also call the FBI to fact check their episodes. One of my favorite things about the past year has been driving to a cafe past a billboard the size of a building with Suits LA on it to have a chat with Marshall where he's talking about his next steps, what books he's reading, what projects he's developing, what projects he has pitching to major studios, and just the graciousness and humility that he has while he's pulling back the curtain on his creative process astounds and inspires me. So please enjoy my conversation with the incredible Marshall Knight. Hey, welcome, Marshall Knight, to Creators Cafe. Hello and cheers.
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 Yes, thanks for having me.
All right, so I am drinking an iced latte from Andante, where we first met, and so I had to go there in honor of you. And What are you drinking today?
I am drinking a Trader Joe's drip coffee, the very coffee that I brew for my mother-in-law every Tuesday and Thursday when she drives from Ventura to watch our son.
Oh, wow.
It's important for us. Very frequently on Wednesday or Friday, I might still have a day-old coffee that I will heat up. But this is the one thing that she asks for, and we are more than happy to have a freshly brewed pot every morning.
That's really wonderful. And luckily you have a very, very sweet child who I've met and is amazing. He's great.
Yeah,
but also, coffee seems like a fair trade.
maybe more than fair, honestly. I actually think we're slightly kind of getting the better end of that bargain.
Exactly. Okay, so I met you right before you started recording Suits LA. And so we're going to talk about that later. And you had a really big role in that. And we'll get into that. But your story started from the writing side, actually back when you went to UCLA. And you said you got started from production. So can you tell me kind of what pulled you into that path and then what made you pivot and change?
Yeah, so, the UCLA film program, which I did in undergrad, at the time it was a 2-year program. I had actually started my first 2 years there in English with the intention of doing creative writing, but fell in love with film, and obviously they have this incredible film school. So when I applied, the options on the table were basically production, which also includes directing, or screenwriting, or essentially documentary animation. And at the time I was thinking, well, I know I want to write, but I have this incredible opportunity in front of me to use the tools and use the people around me to actually make some films, to direct a few things. I only directed 3 or 4 films while I was, maybe 4 films while I was there, including a thesis that I learned a lot from, and will probably never see the light of day again. But at the same time, writing doesn't cost you anything. And as much as I knew that ultimately screenwriting was going to be the foundation of everything that I did, I could take a couple of sort of elective screenwriting classes, but I was going to learn by doing, writing the films that we shot, writing my first feature sort of at nights, basically, during my sophomore and junior year. Do I wish maybe that I'd gotten 2 or 3 more classes under my belt to have saved myself some time, some learning after the fact? Maybe. But, I really do think you learn by doing. And ultimately, I'm so glad that I got the opportunity to direct a bunch, learn so much about how set works. And I think now, as somebody who working in TV, you do go to set, at least if you're lucky enough to be somebody who gets sent to set. And I do think the experience of having been a director and also all the other roles, I was an AD, I was a cinematographer, you have to wear all the hats. And I think that experience was really critical to me understanding like how set works, So, I'm forever grateful I got the opportunity to do it that way. And I don't think I would change anything.
Nice. What was your thesis genre?
I would say it was heavily inspired by Primer. Did you ever see the Shane Carruth movie Primer about basically guys who invent time travel in their garage? So similarly, this was a kind of a thriller about a young guy who's living at home and has maybe kind of an antisocial personality disorder, but he believes, or we are led to believe, that he's been constructing essentially an alchemy device in his basement that he thinks will win him a Nobel Prize and will also make him fabulously rich. But, he descends over 12 minutes into deep paranoia, basically, and it winds up ruining his life.
That sounds fun. Sorry for that guy, but I like the idea a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of idea to try to cram into a short film. I think ultimately it probably needed to be that's probably a short feature ultimately, or some kind of tweener, something, an anthology, hour long maybe, but it was certainly, considering we had a hard 12-minute cap, too much story. And that's ultimately why I don't think it totally works, but it's something I'm proud of for a lot of the technical reasons. I think it looks really beautiful. I think we got some cool performances out of it. I learned a lot about the collaborative power of, what different department heads bring to the table. Like, for instance, in my mind, as I was sort of sketching out this basement that was our primary set that we would build, I assumed it would be gray concrete with some shelves and stuff like that. But our production designer had this wild idea of, well, what if it was half finished? As funny enough, the house that I grew up in, we took a basement space and wound up building it into the room that I lived in my sort of junior and senior year of high school. And the look of wood framing with like pink and yellow insulation and wires and stuff was so much more vivid and so much also kind of sicklier. I mean, it's very sort of body organ, very womb-like, and it just completely changed the entire visual experience of watching this thing from what could have been very drab, and like effectively black and white, into something that was full of color, but a kind of nauseating pink, green, fluorescent sort of color palette, but in a great way, and something I just never in a million years would have occurred to me, but my production designer threw it out there, and what a great idea. And it's like probably the best thing about the whole movie.
Well, and that's obviously great, because then that just opens you up, since that happened so early, to being more collaborative the whole way through the next steps of your process. Yeah. So how did you make the jump from undergrad, taking that jump from loving writing to production, back to writing again? What were your next big steps? And then what took you into getting onto Homeland? Because that's such a big project to get on.
Well, there were a couple steps. I mean, I'd figured ultimately that I would probably write and direct. And in a weird way, the experience of directing those films did not make me second guess exactly, but taking the advice I was given of try to really specialize, especially when you're starting out. There are a lot of multi-hyphenates, but when you're 21, being an exceptional screenwriter, being an exceptional director, being an exceptional DP, I really took that to heart. And I was like, well, the one thing, I have a lot to learn about directing. I know I'm a good writer. And, so I took that to make that really kind of my focus. And then I would say, but, I figured I would mostly be writing feature films. The first couple scripts I wrote were features. some more stuff that will never see the light of day. My senior year, I had an internship at Paramount in the motion picture creative division. And that was the time where they were doing the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie that premiered while I was there. Clash of the Titans, G.I. Joe. As you can see, there's a theme here of these these tentpole franchise movies, which I like some of, and I enjoy going to, but, it's not the kind of stuff I ever envisioned for myself. And seeing how much money was being spent on visual effects for some not very interesting franchise cash-in kind of movies kind of diluted my excitement for, at the very least, the sort of studio system, the feature filmmaking side of the business. And then shortly thereafter, just through some networking, I was given the opportunity by a TV writer I had met to interview for a writer's PA job on a TV show, which was this show on Fox called Lone Star, not 911 Lone Star, but a short-lived Fox drama created by Kyle Killen. And going to work on that job, even though it only lasted about 5 months because we basically got through a couple episodes of filming, they pulled the plug after 2 episodes had aired. I got to experience what a writer's room was like. And I realized this is it. This is the thing I've been looking for that, in film school, we were so focused on the feature side of things. The only TV education I'd really gotten at that point was, 3-camera live studio TV making, basically. It was almost as if the sort of golden age of 2000s, prestige TV, wasn't happening. It was just not part of the curriculum. That's all obviously been corrected quite a bit, but it didn't even occur to me while I was in school that trying to get on a TV writing staff ladder to someday become a showrunner was a path, basically. And that's the path I realized when I was first in a room, that I realized, this is everything that you want to be, because the writer's room is the creative nexus. It's the brain trust. It's the place where all of the creative decisions get made, like an auteur director who gets to control all the facets. All the hiring of your department heads, all the casting, all that stuff happens in that same place, like it would with a film director. But you're not on your fucking feet all day. I can't remember. Is this an explicit podcast? I can't remember.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes.
You're not on your fucking feet all day, which is the hardest thing about being on set. I'm kind of an indoor cat. I kind of like the 9 to 5, the scheduling reliability of, I know I'm going to clock in, have this kind of routine. And also the sort of, the social creative environment of being in a room is something that I didn't know that I was missing until I was in it. When you're surrounded by anywhere between 5 and 10 of the smartest people you've ever been in a room with, and they're just talking, and you look around and realize, oh, wow, we could just make up stuff all day. That's a job. That's a career people can have. And then you clock out and go home. And it was just really eye-opening to see right in front of me, this is the thing that I want to be doing. And since then, I've still written a ton of feature scripts, and my writing partner, Rob, and I do, have a lot of ambitions to do features and actually to direct. I think before too long, now that we've established ourselves more firmly in our writing careers. But yeah, there's it's kind of all the upside with that, with none of the downside, was my experience of it anyway. The problem is, of course, those roles are incredibly hard to actually get. Climbing the ladder is not a simple linear, sort of progression.
Yeah.
Because I guess to answer the question about getting to Homeland, this is a couple of the steps along the way. This show Lone Star got canceled in August of 2010, I think it was, and there I thought, oh, my one shot evaporated in front of me. Right. I was hoping I would be on this thing for a decade of a hit show. And then you get promoted after a couple seasons and boom, you work your way up. But I was very lucky that in the interim, I stayed in touch with a couple of the other assistants who followed some of the other creators, the showrunner's assistant and the creator's assistant, we became good friends, karaoke buddies, etc. And when one of them wound up in an office where, under their overall deal umbrella, I guess it was, Homeland was basically being developed in the office next to where my friend Noelle was working. And she told me to come by the Fox lot, hang out. I remember meeting this incredibly lovely other assistant, the office next door, Charlotte, who has gone on to become an absolute mega superstar herself. But at the time, she was the showrunner's assistant of this show that did not exist, that had a pilot, which was Homeland. And Charlotte set me up an interview to be the writer's assistant. And, meanwhile, I'm working a restaurant job in Beverly Hills as a barista, trying my best not to spill hot trays of tea on, Victoria Beckham's face, that kind of stuff. Just trying to survive the restaurant creative grind, basically the minimum wage, survive starving artist sort of grind. I got this interview for Homeland. I guess it went well, because I joined that first season. I started working on that second episode in 2011, and I was there for almost the entirety of the first two seasons. And it's like, just a wild experience. That felt like one of the last kind of monoculture shows. Game of Thrones is probably the last monoculture show, but people don't really remember that first season of Homeland was like all anybody in TV was talking about. The Grantland. I was a big follower of like Andy Greenwald on Grantland and the podcast that he did with Chris Ryan, and hearing these guys talk in excited tones about like, oh my God, I can't believe what they just did in episode 6 of fucking Homeland. Can you believe what we're seeing? Like, this is revolutionary TV. And I was like, that's us. That's the shit that we were talking about a couple weeks ago. Felt very cool to be at the center of this kind of, zeitgeisty, cultural phenomenon. And then, the first season they won, the Emmy for best show and best drama. And very, very proud of that. I learned just an absolute incalculable amount from those folks on that show. It was such a stacked writing staff. You got Meredith Steen and Henry Rommel, rest in peace. You got Alex Carey and obviously Alex Gonza, Chip Johansson, and Howard Gordon. Just like true murderer's row stuff. I think we've gotten used to the idea of shows being written and run by just a handful of executive producers, but this was kind of a first, as far as I know, of like, it's actually literally just 6 showrunner level executive producers running a show together. Which, it was not always without friction, it's 6 people who are literally at the top of their game, but the collective knowledge, the way that they would just save themselves time and trouble by heading off a bad idea and just going, no, if we do that, then this'll, and everybody will just finish the sentence and go, oh, right, that'll happen. Let's just throw that out. Right. And just the knowledge on display was so incredible. And there I was, 23 years old or whatever I was at the time, thinking I can contribute to this. And I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, I didn't realize how when I would speak up in that room, like how many of the ideas I was pitching were things that they would have all considered and discarded and moved on from, and I think that's one of the hard lessons for any sort of eager, intelligent writer, basically, is when you're in that position where you're so close to doing the thing, to not burn through all of your sort of social capital trying to pitch ideas and things like that. A great writer's assistant absolutely can and should speak up with great ideas. But it's about understanding how much of the bandwidth are you taking up? How much oxygen are you consuming? And honestly, as a writer's assistant, it should probably be less than 1%, in retrospect. But, hey, if I could travel back in time and talk some sense into my 23-year-old self, that's what I would say.
So funny. Is there anything that you remember from that process, since you were working with so many amazing people, that you find yourself doing habits-wise, or how you think about story, or how you break a story?
Well, I think maybe the biggest thing is which is something that just comes with experience. Like I was saying, like that room had probably like 150, 200 years worth of collective writing experience among them. The willingness to write yourself into a box, to know there's no good way out of this situation for a character or for us as a staff, right? Like it seems like the only way we can get out of this is if we kill that person off, and having the confidence to go down a road like that and know we're smart enough to figure out something, and that actually by boxing yourself in, by taking away a lot of your alternatives, it kind of, through necessity being the mother of invention, right? It sort of forces you into being the best, smartest, most inventive version of yourself. So that was something I wish I could think of as real specific on that. And it's so long ago now that I wouldn't want to misquote like how a story break in that room went necessarily, but
Sure.
I think I try to allow myself to not play it safe and trust, especially because I also have a writing partner who is like one of the smartest people that I know. And like between the two of us, I may not have the answer to this. I might finish the act of the screenplay that I'm working on and go, Rob, this felt right in the moment, or it felt cool. It felt worth doing, but also I have no fucking idea how we're going to pay this off. And he might read it and go, hadn't thought of that, but that's sparking this. And suddenly the snowballing happens and boom, you've got something that you've never seen in a movie before or seen in a script before. But you have to trust that you are going to get there. Much in the same way, I think one of the things that I had to learn for myself, this isn't really related to the Homeland experience, but just speaking of trust, like trusting that I'm going to have another good idea. When you're working on like, which of these handful of things am I going to dedicate the next 6 to 12 months of my life doing? And then when something just isn't working and you have to discard it, and you desperately want to make the one thing work. And it's just, sometimes the move is you actually just have to set the thing aside and move on to that other idea or that other idea. And if you love the thing that you've been working on, but you're going to love something else just as much. You just have to let yourself love the other thing just as much, like it's really easy to get stuck, and be unwilling to let go, or to press forward. I mean, you get precious, and people talk about killing their darlings. And I just think, Rob and I have probably, in terms of scripts we've actually written versus ideas that we've considered writing, I would say we've killed 95% of our darlings. Like we've come up with so many ideas that were like, that would be a great fucking movie. That's such a cool pilot idea. And you just go down the road with it. And it's like not quite there, and you just, it's like maybe someday we will crack that, but it's not perfect yet. It's not, we can do better. We will do better. We should keep pushing forward and try to find better. And it can be scary because, I think as all writers, I'm neurotic. I assume that I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm like, I had my last good idea. And you always come up with something new. You always do. But you have to let yourself.
What on the flip side, tells you that an idea is worth sticking with for now. Because I know the feeling of being attached to something, but I also can get excited for things. But how do you know which one is standing out? Is it that other people are having interest in it? Is it that it keeps giving as you keep pursuing it? Or what do you find helps you to know that there's more there to dig into and it's worth still investing in something?
I mean, I think it can be a lot of different signs. You know, I find if it's something that I try to put down and kind of can't stop thinking about, like if it keeps coming back on its own, you know, I wake up going like, God, I haven't thought about that in a couple of months. And boy, that there really is something there, you know? I mean, yeah, Rob and I, we're working on a horror feature right now that I won't get into too much detail about, but the original thought of it probably came up 5-6 years ago when we were working on just like we were blue skying, as we call it, you know, like the anything is possible phase of what we might work on next. And, you know, he had just this one thought about a particular kind of body horror movie about a certain kind of relationship. And I was like, that's really cool. There's not a lot there, but like the image that you just described to me is very sickening and amazing and a brilliant, beautiful metaphor. And let's maybe work on one of these other things that has like, we just know more what the meat is on the bone, basically. But, you know, a year later, we were blue skying again. I was like, there's that body horror thing that you pitched a while back. Like that does come to mind. And he's like, yeah, I've been thinking about that. And it's come up and up and up. And ultimately we realized we're like, once we had to figure out what it actually was beyond sort of a core, like an image and a feeling, you know, and it took a long time to really like hash out what that was and why we were responding to it. But I just sort of, again, trusted the fact that it's like, if it's stuck in there, it's stuck for a reason, you know? And sometimes you don't, there's not like a clear and obvious, it's this perfect metaphor for this thing, or it's about, it answers the why now by touching on this political, social phenomenon that's like, it's not always a very clear, you know, why. Like you can always articulate it. It's like, but if it sticks, it sticks. You know, so it's usually something like that. But I certainly, we are both open to if other people really love something, you know, and keep asking for more of it. You know, we open our hearts and our minds, you know, things that we thought were dead. You know, sometimes we'll have somebody bring up an old project and go, whatever happened to that? I thought it was so good or so cool or so like, so now, you know, sometimes the thing that you set aside a couple years before, you'll realize like, were we ahead of our times? Or are we just sort of like lucking into, if we revive that now, it would feel so prescient and so, so timely. And you'll wind up resurrecting an old project just because, you know, somebody reminded you like, oh, that would be such a cool movie to see right now, or a cool script to read right now.
How did you and Rob first start working together as writing partners?
Well, you know, we were both assistants. We were on Suits, the original Suits. He was the writer's assistant. I was the script coordinator, and we shared a little box of an office. And we spent all of our time in close proximity talking about, you know, life, the world, and everything, but also like what movies we loved, what kind of shows we were watching, what we were reading, as well as just like our general philosophies and things. And the first thing that happened is we started a writers group together, where we sort of collected another 4 or so of our peers and decided we wanted to have a regularly scheduled time to share work and critique work and keep that muscle, you know, active. And through that, really more than anything, I got to realize like what a fucking good writer he is. And also like how our tastes really did overlap in our sort of view on story. And then, the big inciting factor was when a freelance script became available in early season 7 of Suits, there was only there was one script and the two of us. And so we got to share it. And it went really well. And ultimately the opportunity to get staffed on the show came. And so we agreed to partner up because this was working really well, and it was kind of a leap of faith a little bit, but we realized we could, if our time on Suits ended and we had written a couple pilots together and we realized, you know what, this is actually not for us. My agent at the time was like, no one's going to look at your credit and go, you're half a writer. They're just going to see you worked on Suits. So like, try it out. Like if it makes you better, if you love working together, like, great partnerships are hard to come by. And it really did. I think we really, we learned so much from each other. I would hate to like sort of mischaracterize what Rob thinks about his own writing from that period, but I feel like, we had strengths and things that we each needed to work on that I think really complemented each other. I sometimes can get hyper focused on like really nitty gritty details of if you move this comma here, suddenly the tone of this changes and the scene becomes about this, like really fine grained. And then also the like 50,000 foot, like how is what we're doing with this genre informing these themes, and whereas Rob, when we first started working together, was such to me, a genius about structure and a genius about, I guess what you'd call like the meta text, like how does this relate to every other sort of movie or show or book, or, he's got like this encyclopedic knowledge, especially of like, he's seen every gnarly B movie you could ever imagine. I mean, he literally has his own podcast is like basically almost entirely about crazy B movies and stuff. And so to have somebody who can sort of speak to, if we do this scene this way, he'll say something like, so this is kind of the Friday the 13th version of this scene, but we could do the Halloween version of this scene, or maybe we could do a little bit of the sort of Jason X version of this scene, and I'm like, yeah. I gotta see, I've seen one of those, I was like, I gotta get caught up, I mean, I don't feel like I'm ever going to get caught up on his, watch list basically. But, that stuff always kind of blew my mind, but I'm always interested in like, how are we in dialogue with the stuff that's come before, hopefully the stuff that will come after, or the stuff that is kind of currently being made. And it's something that just, it's like air for him, and it's something I feel like I have nothing but blind spots, in terms of the movies and things that I've missed.
Yes.
So that's just one example of many of ways in which I'm like, he has a skill that I was lacking. And I feel like we really kind of complemented each other. And, I just feel like we've gotten better and better and better as we've solidified our process and, tried to learn from the greats, talk to other partners about, how they do things, and pick up process tips wherever we can. There's this, if you've ever heard of Film Crit Hulk, film criticism blog basically, but Film Crit Hulk has a very funny character breakdown format. That's basically, I think it's referred to as the character tree, but we basically like stole that and use a version of it for all of our character breakdowns. And this is something that's very helpful for anybody who's considering working with a partner, writing in particular, is even if you don't do like really intense outlining, like character breakdowns are maybe the best way to get two people on the same page about like what's really going on here in this story between these people. Because if I go take a big section of script and I bring back these scenes, Rob's going to read them through the filter of, we decided that this character wants this, but needs this in order to grow, speaks and thinks this way. And when you read that document, he'll go, you know what, that's maybe not the action that we agreed upon, but that sounds right for what that character would do. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you know what, even though this sounds pretty close to what we agreed upon, in retrospect, it actually doesn't really feel right for the character that we landed on. And the fact that we have that kind of shared source of truth is the thing that it kind of saves us from having to like argue and restate over and over again what we really think these characters are about and what we really think is going on and what the themes are and, you know, what the push and pull is. We've done that work already. So we have this thing that we can refer back to, and it basically is the decider in almost all of our sort of forever debating a path to go down. You know, we just say, we did all that work to figure out who this character is. And, you know, the story at this point needs to sort of follow what we believe that character would or wouldn't do.
I imagine, especially because a lot of times you're working in TV where you create characters who then you put through different situations. That works especially well too, as opposed to maybe from film, you see the arc of the film and it has to match, it has to like click into whatever the action is going to be. I really like that model of creating of like, these are the people, what would they do? And then you're not as married to the circumstances because you're just putting those people in different circumstances. I really like that. Well,
it was funny in a room, sometimes you don't necessarily know everything from jump. Like when somebody writes a pilot, you know, you have an idea of who the characters are, but you have to discover a lot of the ins and outs of them. And like most recently on Suits LA, I do feel like we were, as with many shows, figuring out what really makes each of these people tick. And, you know, some of them we discovered very quickly, and we're like, this person is like clear as day, you know, almost to the point that they're like an archetype. And some of them took some more work. And, you know, that's part of our job and part of the journey of being on a season of TV is like understanding not everything about who this person is has been written. And you have to give yourself both, you don't want to handcuff yourself in places you don't have to, you know, writing a backstory is very helpful for me as a writer to understand like what, you know, what's going on internally with this person. But introducing a backstory into the canon of the show, especially early, can really hamstring you in terms of, shoot, we really, really leaned hard on the fact this character was an only child. But in season 2, boy, it would have been incredible story for a sibling to show up and for them to have a romance with another one of our characters. The dynamic that, like, you got to be careful not to get too solid, you know? So there's a little bit of a shifting sands thing that can happen sometimes in those, especially I think the early seasons of a show. Where you want it to feel clear, even if you're like, really, really, really don't want to lock down all the details yet.
So with Suits LA, it had 13 episodes over one season, and you and Rob are the executive story editors, so you're overseeing all of that. And the season is really lives partially, like a major portion of it is in flashbacks that then, of course, wrap the whole way through the season and end in the finale of the season. So how much of the outline of the arc of the story are you really writing and overseeing, and how much of it is passed off to a writer, and where does that happen kind of in time?
I should clarify. Executive story editor is just a title. I mean, and we're sort of on that's like the third rung of the sort of writers, the WGA kind of title structure. So, you know, we're in sort of the lower third probably of the hierarchy of the writers on the show. So, you know, the showrunner ultimately is the one who is making all the sort of, you know, in this case, it's Aaron Korish, right? Aaron has final say on essentially every creative decision. I mean, that's the sort of the blessing and the curse of being a showrunner is like it all, the buck stops with you, right? And early on in that season, he laid out a lot of the backstory stuff, which you're referring to in the flashbacks. He had a very, very clear idea of like what that through line was, the story he wanted to tell about, you know, how does the character go from being like a hard ass, a DA fighting the New York mob to being a glitzy entertainment attorney out in LA, right? Like how do you bridge that, right? So he had a very clear idea of like what that story is, and we actually on our big board, right? 13 episodes. The spine of the thing we kind of laid out in these green cards at the top, like what we knew about the flashback storyline, which we didn't know how much weight a given episode was going to have. Even at the beginning, we didn't know if every episode would have one. That was all stuff that we had to kind of feel out. So he laid out what the essential sort of tent poles of that thing were, and it was over the course of the season. Generally, what would happen is you realize, like, oh, this one sentence, you can really build a 4 to 6 beat sort of plot line out of this and really kind of flesh it out. And so it would, as these things do, they sort of ballooned. In 2020 hindsight, like how much we should or shouldn't have leaned on the flashbacks is sort of up for debate. I think it's the biggest departure from what the original Suits was, right? And even in tone, it's much more, and then we did this sort of intentionally. It felt really different in it's like handheld cameras and kind of grittier, harsher lighting. Like it felt like we're in kind of more of a crime show for those elements. And that was by design to give you that juxtaposition of where he was and where he is now. But I think because it felt so different, I think some of the sort of people who love the original Suits may have, if not bounced off of, been a little perplexed. What is this? How is this Suits, right? Whereas the present day stuff, even if it didn't have any of our main characters returning from the original show, aside from a couple of cameos, you can get how that suits. Like it's the rhythms, the pacing, the kinds of cases, the sense of humor, like those things, even if they're slightly less tangible than it's Harvey Specter and Mike Ross, it's not those characters, but it has all these elements of when we think of suitsiness, right? It's got the je ne sais quoi of Suits.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we'll be thinking back on, why did people respond or not respond the way that we had hoped they would, probably for the rest of our lives, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, it's an open question, like are there people for whom spending that time on that story was just a no-go for them? Were we doomed in that, people really only wanted to spend time with those specific characters from that original show that they loved? It's hard to know, it's really hard to know. I realize that your question was not actually about like what happened with Suits LA, but that's the route that my brain went.
I wanted to ask just how, now that you've had a little bit of time to kind of process that the show's not moving forward, how are you feeling about it? What are you proud of? If you went back in time, would you tell yourself anything different?
I'm feeling incredibly grateful that I got to spend that time largely in a reunion with some of my favorite people that I've ever had the chance to work with. I mean, what was so cool about walking in on day one of Suits LA is it felt like we had taken a 5-year weekend, basically, and it was just kind of like oh, hey, hi, how are you? And it just kind of rolled right into it, I adore the people on that staff, and also was so grateful to get to meet the couple of new writers one who is new entirely to the show, and one writer, John Cowan, who I adore, who was on the show, the original show, before I was ever there. So we'd never gotten the chance to work together. So I'm just incredibly grateful that I got that opportunity. I'm very grateful, especially to have gotten so much time back on set, which, one of the big sticking points during the writer's strike, you may remember, was like writers aren't getting set to set anymore and learning those producing skills because, I think the argument goes that the companies are trying to de-emphasize the writers as the holders of, I guess, what they think of as power. And we're just like, we were in the room where the creative decisions were made, and we're like holding the reins to make sure this thing doesn't go off the rails. And that thing is just not happening anymore. So the fact that I was able to be on set for 3 episodes in a 13 episode season was tremendous. I am genuinely really extremely proud of the episode that Rob and I wrote, which just through sort of luck of the draw wound up being not entirely a retrospective, but was sort of built around honoring the legacy of John Amos, who you may know played his last screen role was playing a version of himself in the pilot of Suits LA. And then when he passed away, we, saw the opportunity to kind of recognize him and what a great legacy some of his, his roles, what a mark that man made on TV history in particular, especially through, a show like Good Times. We literally called the episode Good Times for that reason. And looking back at the entire arc of the season, it was the exact midpoint. It's 7 of 13. And I do feel like it represented a kind of if not a turning point, kind of an opening up. It was the first episode of the bunch that didn't revolve around one big ongoing, the murder trial that basically takes place over the first half of the season. Mm-hmm. And, it was a chance to kind of slow down, get introspective, just dig into character, also really showcase LA. We got to shoot Musso and Frank in Hollywood, which was unbelievable. We had this great sense of being kind of out and about in the city that, Rob and I really love. And, just very proud of that episode of TV. I love the episodes that we wrote on the original show, but I think this felt very unique and special. Kind of emotional to actually watch in the end.
I just want to interject that I totally agree. I thought it was a beautiful episode. And what I liked about it was in Suits, the original Suits, I've spent some time in New York. I've spent some time in like corporate New York in those offices. And there was something that was captured that was very real of that pressure cooker where you have to work with these people, and some of them you love and some of them you just cannot stand, but you have to do it anyway, and you get really passionate about it. And I think in your episode, it had some of the best parts of LA and why we as creatives love LA and the people that inspired us when we were kids and how they affect us and how they're kind of players in our day-to-day life here, actually. And, I drive up the street and I see a Suits LA, giant billboard and then come see you at the coffee shop. And like, that's a cool, nice part of our life that is like an undercurrent to everything else that's happening. And I think that you and Rob, that plus Mooser and Frank's and all of those little pieces really like shone in that episode in a really sweet way that worked very well.
That's very kind of you to say. It's funny. There's a line I believe got cut from the episode for time, but I really encapsulates a lot of how I think about LA, which is, for such a big city, it sure is a small town, and that at least within, the sort of creative community. It's so funny. Andante is such a funny little microcosm. So you go in there and you don't realize it, but you're sitting next to a guy who's like, oh, he's working on a show for Marvel. And, she's got like 200,000 followers on TikTok. And it's like, right. It's like, there's this whole kind of, especially like we're leaning further and further into the sort of TikTok crowd, especially now that Erewhon has become the epicenter of creator influencer culture, basically. But the fact that you can just look out and go, oh, these people who make, the stuff that when I lived back at home in Napa, I just thought of as like this wild, imagined up magic stuff that winds up on your screen. These are just the people who go out and do it every day. It's like it's a career, it's a profession, it's a thing that your neighbors love to do and feel very lucky to be able to get paid to do it every day, or as in many cases, not get paid to do it.
But are still doing it, which is also admirable and impressive to me.
Yeah, but that was something that I definitely wanted to. I'm glad that you felt like that was captured in that episode. That sense that we're kind of all in it together, I mean, and again, for a very big city, it does feel like you can sort of walk out your door if you live somewhere that's, worth walking, and just, run into either someone from real life or someone from the screen at any given moment. I know people in New York like to think that they have a monopoly on that kind of thing, but they don't.
Yeah. And it's nice it was really sweet too, just to get to see something that was produced in LA about LA happening. I really hope that we have a little bit more of that coming. But it was nice that we had that moment in time. For sure. Yeah. I
mean, I'll keep my fingers crossed. I know this big tax credit thing should be a boost. We had people walk up to us on the Fox lot. It's a Universal show, but our writer's room was on the Fox lot. And some crew folks walked up to us one day when they realized we were on Suits LA, and they're like, oh my God, thank God you guys are here. Thank God you guys got that tax credit and you decided, I guess your company decided, Universal decided, you were not going to shoot Vancouver for LA. You are going to be here hiring people who live here and have done this their whole lives. That's not a shot at Vancouver, although I think faking Vancouver for LA would have been silly. We wouldn't have been hardly the first to do it. But there was that real sense of, that it mattered that we were, that we hired this big crew and we're employing all these people. And I hope like hell, we start bringing some production back because it's amazing the wealth of experience and knowledge that exists. When you walk around set and you realize, you got our PA Kish had a Tenet hat. It was like, you worked on Tenet? He's like, oh, dude, I'm all the Nolan stuff. And it was like, that's wild. It's wild to have people, and everyone's got all their gear from all the great shows and movies and stuff that they've worked on. And just this, like I was talking about the Homeland thing, that wealth of knowledge. There's kind of no replacing that. There's no replacing putting, in that case, 6 people into a room. In the case of Suits, 100 people into a soundstage, and they've all been doing it basically their whole adult lives. It's really special, and I just think, props to places like Atlanta and New York, New Jersey, and New Mexico, places where they're really building a scene for themselves and production facilities and great crews. But, I think it would be a real shame if we lost that, that thing that makes the LA production scene so special.
Mm-hmm. If you had a magic wand and you could be working on anything with anybody, what kind of projects would you be doing? What would that look like?
Jesus. Magic wand. I mean, well, I would probably no pressure. Well, it's like I would probably take one of the dozens of projects that that Rob and I, have dreamed up for ourselves that we weren't able to sort of get off the ground for one reason or another. I think you may have heard about we have a sci-fi workplace drama about a teleportation startup that basically says everything that there is to say about like how we got into the horrible moment as a world that we're living through right now. And, just it's about sort of tech bro disruptor culture and like, the sort of pathology of the kind of people who love that stuff basically. And how that has sort of infected all of, how business is done in America. And, it's very heady, but I like to take heady ideas and boil them down into things that are like sort of rip-roaring fun, basically. And the idea of doing essentially like Mad Men in a sci-fi universe is like, what could be cooler than that for me? But,
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Something like that.
That's very cool. And I really appreciate when we talk, you're very open about sharing what you're working on, what you're thinking about. And, you're working on this major show, you have a new kid, you're living life in 2025, and you're reading so much. You're looking for things to possibly adapt. You're looking for ideas. You're looking for what's popular right now, while you're working on your pitches for multiple projects. And I just want to take a moment and say, I think right now it's really easy to get discouraged with everything that's happening. And I think, I really look to you as somebody who's an inspiration for just showing up and getting in there and doing the work that makes the work possible down the line that no one sees and no one knows has to happen. And you're just in there doing it all the time.
That's really kind of you to say. And I would die if I didn't. That's basically it's the kind of thing that I do because I have to do it, not like I'm being pressed or forced by any kind of outside, there's no financial reason necessarily to be doing it. It's more, what would I be doing with myself if not trying to create more? It's just, I think my head will explode, if I can't get the ideas out, even if nobody ever sees a single thing that I write from here on out, I need them to exist somewhere outside of my brain and outside of my body, basically. So that's where a lot of that impulse comes from. It's just, I will lose my damn mind if I'm not working, So
I do. I understand.
But I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, I know you do. I think you and I are alike this way. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, right. There are definitely more lucrative ways I could be spending my time, and it's a really big deal for me to have that time set aside to make things. Yeah. So, what's your creator's challenge for my audience?
Well, speaking of adaptation, it's funny. I think a lot about adaptation, like you said. I'm reading a lot of these short stories, things, I try to find stuff that's off the beaten path, mainly because if you've heard of a book, for instance, some company already owns the rights to do it. But it's funny, maybe it's just because I've been working in sort of screenplay format forever. I can't really read anything or play a video game or sometimes even watch something without thinking about how it would be adapted into something else. So the challenge would be to essentially write a pitch for a work of adaptation, something that has not already been adapted, at least into the format that you see it, right? So say a book has been adapted into a movie, maybe you would envision it as a TV show, for instance, or a video game or an immersive experience, right? And in the pitch, I think really speak to why that's the format, why that's the right way to do it. And I think it will be pretty eye-opening about the different ways that different formats, different media can express story. So yeah, pitch an adaptation of something that you haven't seen, why it has to happen in your chosen medium.
I love that. Do you have any recommendations for somebody who is a writer and wants to get better at pitching? Are there any books or resources or even pitch Bibles you've seen, or just anything to think about that you have found helpful?
I mean, it's so funny. There are a million pitch Bibles. I would recommend almost any of them, almost just to see the breadth of how they can be handled. There are a couple famous ones. The Stranger Things one is, I think, one of the ones that gets passed around the most, which is, I think, really fantastic. But the original pitch document for Noah Hawley's Fargo adaptation is pretty remarkable insofar as how little it actually tells you, basically, or the unique way in which it sort of describes its story as a triangle cycle. It's visual and very unusual. And then there are some that just do, the Wire famously has just this wall to wall text. It's as dense as you'd imagine the show is, it's kind of written like the novel version of the show in some places. Recently for a project Rob and I have been working on, we picked up the pitch deck for New Girl, which is, I think, phenomenal.
Okay.
That would be New Girl's probably the most enjoyable one I've read recently. But I definitely think that Fargo one is pretty special in its own really weird way.
Okay, great. Yeah, I haven't seen either of those two, so I'm looking forward to checking them out. Nice.
You got it.
And if somebody is in the audience and wants to follow you and keep in touch with what you're doing and hear a little bit more from you, what's the best way to follow you?
Sure. Follow me on, I have long deleted X, the website formerly known as Twitter. I'm no longer on there. But on Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram, you can find me at Marshall Not Pass, spelled exactly as you'd imagine it. Marshall Not Pass if you need it spelled out. Come say hello. I don't post as much as I would like, but I'm a lurker. I'm on it more than is healthy. So come say hi.
Aren't we all? I definitely am. Yeah.
No doubt.
Well, this was so fantastic. Thank you for chatting with me. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you out and about and lurking and seeing everything that you're working on as well.
Appreciate it, Jess. I'm sure I will see you tomorrow at the shop. So
I hope so. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much. And cheers.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers, cheers. Join the community and share your creative challenges on Instagram and Facebook at Creators Cafe by Kika Labs. And also check out my website, kikalabs.com, KIKALABS.com, to sign up for the mailing list so you always know when a new podcast is released, and to check out my coaching and digital courses to help you be a more confident and joyful creator.